Welcome to the deep dive. Trying to keep up with cyber threats, especially ransomware, it feels like you're chasing smoke sometimes, just when you think you've got a grip on how they work.
It changes. They adapt, find new angles. It's relentless, honestly,
Hmm.
particularly with ransomware groups.
Exactly. It's moved way beyond just locking files. Now it's data theft, mind games, weird tactics. It's complex.
And that speed of adaptation, that's the real challenge. They find a weakness, exploit it, figure out how to bypass defenses, find new ways to pressure victims.
Yeah.
It's impressive in a scary way.
Keeps us on our toes for sure. Which brings us to today's deep dive. We're focusing on a ransomware family that's really made some noise since it popped up, FOG Ransomware.
Right.
And our mission, as always, is to take this stack of research you've given us, articles, blog posts from folks like Trend Micro, Symantec, Carbon Black, Halcyon, Sentinel, CrowdStrike, and really unpack what they tell us about FOG.
Yeah, we'll be looking at where it came from, what it did initially, the nuts and bolts of how the attacks unfold, getting in, moving around, the actual damage.
And how it's changed, because the sources make it clear it hasn't stood still. Plus, we need to get into some of the really unusual tools and behaviors that have shown up recently, stuff that's not your typical ransomware playbook.
Definitely some strange elements in there. And crucially, we'll talk about what this all means for you, for defense, for understanding the threat landscape. What do the sources suggest we do about it?
Absolutely. It's a moving target, and these sources give us a great window into its evolution. Okay, let's start unpacking. Let's dig into FOG ransomware. So jumping right in, the basics. What is FOG ransomware? When did it first show up?
Okay, so the sources peg its first appearance, or at least the first documented cases, around May 2024. It's a Windows-based ransomware, and its fundamental job, like most ransomware, is pretty straightforward. Encrypt your files, make them unusable.
And then demand money to get them back.
Exactly. Pay up for the decryption key. That's the core premise.
Now, is this something totally new, or does it have roots somewhere?
That's a good question. The Halcyon source specifically mentions their analysis suggests FOG is a variant of the STOP-DJVU family.
Ah, STOP-DJVU. That's been around forever, hitting lots of consumers' businesses too, right?
A very prolific family, yes.
Yeah.
So FOG seems to have inherited some DNA, some code or characteristics from that lineage. It didn't just spring out of nowhere.
Okay, so it has a known background. When it first surfaced back in May 2024, did the researchers notice anything specific about its initial tactics or goals?
Yeah, CrowdStrike highlighted something interesting there. In those early sightings, FOG seemed almost laser-focused purely on the encryption part.
Just locking files.
Pretty much. They noted that unlike a lot of the big-name ransomware gangs we hear about now, these initial FOG attacks didn't seem to involve data exfiltration stealing data first.
So no double extortion threat right out of the gate.
Apparently not initially. The focus on just encryption suggested to CrowdStrike that maybe the goal was quick payouts, hit victims, lock their stuff, demand cash quickly to get operations back online, rather than drawing things out with data leak threats.
Kind of a smash and grab approach. Less complex, faster turnaround.
That seems to be the interpretation of the early activity, yeah. And this is a point, all the sources hammer home FOG evolved rapidly. It didn't stay in that initial mode for long. Its tactics, its capabilities, they started changing pretty quickly in the months after May 2024.
Which, as you said, is kind of standard operating procedure for successful ransomware groups, isn't it? Adapt or die out.
Precisely. They learn, they react to defenses, they look for better ways to make money.
Okay, so talking about those early days, the sources mentioned FOG seemed to be picking on specific types of organizations at first.
They did. The initial wave, according to CrowdStrike, Sentinel, and Symantec, seemed quite targeted. Specifically, educational institutions, schools, universities, and organizations in the recreation sector, mostly in the United States.
Education and recreation, that feels slightly different from the usual suspects like healthcare or finance. Any theories why they started there?
Several sources chimed in on that. CrowdStrike suggested, and it makes sense, that these sectors often have tighter budgets. Maybe less money for cutting-edge security, potentially smaller IT teams stretched thin compared to big corporations.
So potentially easier targets, less resistance.
That's the thinking. They might encounter less sophisticated offenses, maybe have more dwell time before anyone notices something's wrong. CrowdStrike also had an interesting thought about the recreation sector.
Yeah.
The seasonal nature of some of those businesses. Maybe during peak season, IT is overwhelmed, and during the off-season, systems aren't monitored as closely. It could create windows of opportunity for attackers.
That's smart. Looking at operational rhythms, not just technical holes. Okay, so they picked their initial targets. How are they actually getting in? What were the main ways FOG operators breached these networks early on?
The big one, mentioned consistently across Symantec, CrowdStrike, and Sentinel, was compromised remote access, specifically VPN credentials.
Getting hold of legitimate logins for the company's virtual private network.
Exactly. And that could happen a few ways. Maybe traditional phishing attacks tricking users into giving up their details. Or, as Sentinel and CrowdStrike pointed out, they might have been buying credentials.
Buying them.
Yeah, from initial access brokers or IABs. These are groups on the dark web that specialize in just breaking into networks. They get that initial foothold and then sell the access off to other criminal groups, like ransomware gangs.
Wow, so they don't even have to do the initial break-in themselves sometimes. They just buy a key to the door.
It's a whole underground economy.
Were there specific VPN products or vulnerabilities they were hitting hard?
CrowdStrike did flag a strong connection to SonicWall SSL VPNs in attacks they tracked between August and November 2024. Their experts suspect, though, couldn't definitively prove it wasn't just stolen credentials, that the attackers were likely exploiting a specific known vulnerability. CVE 2024-40766.
A known flaw.
Yeah, particularly in older versions of the SonicWall firmware that hadn't been patched. So if an organization was lagging on updates,
That could be their way in. An open door because of an unpatched vulnerability. Makes sense.
it's a classic scenario. Though, as CrowdStrike cautioned, you can't rule out that credentials for those SonicWall accounts were phished or bought elsewhere too. Could be either or both.
Right. Stolen keys or...
Symantec did mention a specific campaign later, in April 2025, where they observed email and phishing attacks being used as the initial way in. So they definitely added that to their repertoire as they evolved.
Okay, so they find a way in VPN, phishing, maybe bot access, they've got a foothold. What happens next? Walk us through that attack chain from getting inside to the actual ransomware deployment.
Right, so getting in is just step one. Now the real work starts for the attacker. CrowdStrike lays out a pretty typical multi-stage process, which you see with a lot of intrusions. First, the initial exploitation or intrusion, then comes lateral movement and reconnaissance, then the deployment and encryption, and finally the extortion piece.
Standard phases. Let's break down FOG's approach based on the sources. That lateral movement and reconnaissance stage, what are they doing there?
Okay, so once they have that first compromised machine or account, they need to spread out. They want to find more valuable systems, get higher privileges, basically become administrators if they can. CrowdStrike mentioned techniques like pass the hash.
Using password hashes instead of clear text passwords to move between machines.
Exactly. And credential stuffing, trying stolen usernames and passwords or common passwords against other accounts and systems on the network, trying to unlock more doors once they're inside.
Reusing credentials, hoping for weak passwords elsewhere.
It often works. And while they're moving, they're mapping things out reconnaissance. They need to understand the network layout. Where are the important servers, domain controllers, file shares with sensitive data? CrowdStrike noted things like Active Directory enumeration, basically getting a list of users, groups, computers, permissions. They might even use tools like Bloodhound.
Bloodhound? What's that?
It's a tool that visualizes Active Directory environments. It helps attackers see the relationships between users, groups, and computers and find the easiest paths to get administrator rights or access specific sensitive resources. It's like creating a treasure map of the network's privileges.
Wow. Okay, so very systematic reconnaissance. How do they manage all this? How do they stay connected and control things?
CrowdStrike observed them using remote access tools, specifically mentioning AnyDesk, to set up their command and control or C2 channel.
AnyDesk, like the legitimate remote support tool.
Yep. Using legitimate, well-known tools like AnyDesk is a smart tactic. It helps them blend in. Network defenses might not flag AnyDesk traffic as immediately suspicious compared to, say, custom malware calling home. Plus, it gives them quick, interactive control over compromised machines.
That's classic living off the land, isn't it? Using what's already there or expected to be there to avoid detection.
It is. Makes their job much easier and keeps them hidden for longer. The sources suggest FOG operators were pretty adept at this.
Okay, so they're inside, they're moving around, mapping the place out, escalating privileges. Before they drop the ransomware header, What do they do to make sure the victim can't just easily recover or fight back?
This is where they get destructive, really crippling the defenses and recovery options. Several sources detailed this. CrowdStrike and Sentinel alone both reported FOG attackers actively disabling security software, turning off Windows Defender, stopping other antivirus or EDR agents they find.
Taking out the security guards first.
Exactly. Then they go after backups and recovery. Halcyon and Sentinel alone specifically called out deleting volume shadow copies. They often use that built-in Windows command, vsadmin.exe, delete shadows, all quiet.
And shadow copies are like local snapshots, right? So deleting them stops you from just rolling files back to a pre-attack state.
Correct. It removes a really common quick recovery method.
Yeah.
And they don't stop there. Halcyon mentioned seeing them specifically target Veeam backups.
Veeam, that's a major enterprise backup system.
It is. So they're not just hitting standard Windows features, they're actively hunting for and trying to delete or disable dedicated backup solutions. They really want to cut off all escape routes.
Man, they're thorough. Anything else they sabotage?
Sentinel added a couple more. They stopped database services. Why? Because databases often lock their files while running, which would prevent encryption. So they stopped the service to make sure those valuable database files are vulnerable.
Makes sense. Can't encrypt a locked file.
Right. And Sentinel also noted that for the Linux variants of FOG they observed, the malware tried to terminate processes related to virtual environments, likely trying to ensure they could successfully encrypt virtual machine files like VMDKs.
Okay, so a full court press to disable security, delete backups, and unlock files before encryption. Once the stage is set, how do they actually push out the ransomware itself, and what's the encryption like?
The deployment often uses those same lateral movement tools. Halcyon and Symantec mentioned seeing the ransomware payload pushed out using things like PSExec or Impacket's SMB tools, basically, remotely executing the ransomware binary on target machines across the network.
Using the access they already established?
Precisely. Then the encryption kicks off. Halcyon and CrowdStrike describe the method. It's a hybrid approach. They use a fast symmetric algorithm, probably AES 256, to actually scramble the data in the files. That's quick.
Okay.
But the key used for that AES encryption, that key gets encrypted using a much stronger asymmetric algorithm, like RSA 2048.
Ah, the public-private key pair thing. So they encrypt the fast AES key with the public RSA key, and you need their private RSA key to get the AES key back to decrypt your files.
That's the core of it. As CrowdStrike points out, without that attacker's private RSA key or finding a serious flaw in how they implemented the encryption, it's practically impossible for the victim to decrypt the files themselves.
Making payment the only viable option, theoretically. How do victims know it's FOG? Do the encrypted files look a certain way?
Yes, there are telltale signs. The most obvious is the file extension added to encrypted files. Multiple sources. Friend Micro, Halcyon, Sentinel, CrowdStrike, all listed common ones. .fog, case sensitive sometimes, and FLO lacdet.
.fog, .flu dact, pretty clear markers.
Sentinel threw another one in the mix they'd seen. .foggy.
Foggy.
On
Yeah.
Sentinel added a neat technical detail for the Windows versions. The attackers could actually customize that appended extension. It's set in a JSON configuration file the ransomware uses.
Oh, interesting. So they could change it campaign by campaign if they wanted, making simple extension blocking rules a bit less reliable.
Potentially, yeah. Adds flexibility for them. One other target sometimes noted, mentioned by CrowdStrike and Sentinel, was virtual machine disk files, VMDKs. Suggests they were sometimes specifically trying to cripple virtual infrastructure.
Hitting the VMs directly.
Yeah, though Halcyon did add a note of caution that they didn't see this VMDK targeting consistently across all FOG incidents. So maybe it depended on the specific environment or the variant being used.
Okay, so that covers the initial attack pattern. Get in, move around, disable defenses, encrypt using AES RSA, leave those .fog or .flocked extensions. But the sources stressed FOG didn't stay like that. What was the big evolution?
The major shift, which seemed to happen around July 2024, according to Halcyon and CrowdStrike, was the adoption of double extortion tactics.
Ah, double extortion. That's where they steal the data before encrypting it, right?
Exactly. It adds a whole new layer of pressure. Now, it's not just pay to get your files back. It's also pay or we leak your sensitive data publicly.
Which could be devastating. Customer info, internal documents, trade secrets.
Absolutely. Suddenly, you're facing not just operational disruption, but a potential massive data breach, regulatory fines, reputational damage. It gives the attackers much more leverage.
So how did they facilitate this? Did they set up one of those leak sites?
They did. Sentinel alone reported observing a Tor-based data leak site, or DLS, associated with FOG, first appearing around that same time frame, July 2024. This is where they'd list non-paying victims and threaten to or actually publish the stolen data.
The public shaming site. Did this shift to double extortion change who they were targeting?
It seems like it coincided with a broadening of their targets, yes. CrowdStrike noted that while they started somewhat focused on education and recreation, they seemed to become much more opportunistic.
Meaning they'd hit almost anyone they could compromise.
That appears to be the trend. Less picky, more about finding any vulnerable organization with data worth stealing and systems worth encrypting. This really increases the risk across the board, no longer just those initial sectors, but potentially any industry.
Were they going after bigger fish too? More profitable targets?
CrowdStrike hinted at potential targeting of more lucrative sectors like financial services, though they were a bit cautious about confirming it early on. But then, Halcyon and Symantec provided a concrete example. They detailed a significant attack in May 2025, targeting a financial institution in Asia.
Okay, so that confirms they definitely expanded their scope to high-value targets. Did the sources give any idea of the scale, like how many victims?
Trade Micro and Sentinel alone offered some numbers, apparently gleaned from monitoring that leak site. They reported seeing 100 victims listed just since January 2025.
100 victims in just a few months of 2025. That's pretty active.
Yeah, they broke it down further. 53 listed in February 25, 18, in January 29, and March. So fairly steady stream. And the victim list spanned a wide range of sectors: tech, education, still, manufacturing, transport, business services, healthcare, retail, government, pretty much across the board.
A diverse portfolio of victims.
Trend Micro also added their own perspective, saying their systems had detected 173 instances of FOG activity targeting their customers since June 2024, and noted these attempts were blocked. So it shows they were active, sometimes successful, sometimes stopped.
Okay, so FOG evolved into a fairly standard, albeit active, double extortion ransomware operation. But you mentioned earlier there was something weird about them, something unusual.
Ah, yes. This is where the story takes a turn, into the genuinely strange, deviating quite a bit from the typical ransomware script. The sources, especially Halcyon and Symantec, really zoned in on a highly atypical collection of tools used in some recent attacks, particularly that May 2025 attack on the Asian financial institution.
Atypical how? What was so strange about their toolkit?
It was the mix. They weren't just using the standard hacker tools or malware components you might expect. They were blending legitimate, off-the-shelf commercial software stuff businesses use every day for normal reasons, with open-source hacking utilities and other tools you just don't usually see bundled together in a ransomware attack. It was a very eclectic combination.
Legitimate business software mixed with hacking tools. That does sound odd. What kind of tools are we talking about?
Okay, let's break it down. One of the most eyebrow-raising tools, highlighted by both Halcyon and Symantec, was Cytica.
Cytica. Never heard of it. What does it normally do?
It used to be called Ekron. It's a legitimate employee monitoring software package. Companies buy it to record user screen activity, log keystrokes, monitor application usage, for internal security audits, compliance checks, maybe productivity tracking.
Employee monitoring software.
Yeah.
And the FOG attackers were deploying this.
That's what the evidence indicates, yes. They were allegedly using this legit monitoring tool, presumably to spy on what employees were doing, capture credentials directly as they were typed, steal sensitive information right off the screen or from documents being worked on.
Wow.
Both Halcyon and Symantec really emphasize how unusual this is for a ransomware attack. You just don't typically see attackers deploying full-blown employee monitoring suites. Symantec even found specific file names tied to it, like cytoclient.exe or update.exe, and saw later attempts to cover tracks by killing Cytica processes using TaskKill and SecSec.
That is bizarre. Why use that instead of a standard keylogger or info-stealer malware?
Hard to say for sure, but think about it. It's designed to capture everything a user does, potentially very stealthily if configured right.
Yeah.
It might bypass defenses, looking for known malicious stealers, and it provides incredibly rich intelligence, not just passwords, but context, workflows, sensitive data displayed on screen. It's deep surveillance.
Okay, that's one very weird tool. What else was in this odd mix?
Another standout was GC2. Halcyon and Symantec described this one as an open-source post-exploitation backdoor. But the really clever and strange part is how it handles its command and control. It uses Google Sheets or Microsoft SharePoint.
Wait, it gets commands from a spreadsheet? Or a SharePoint site? How does that even work?
Yeah, it's pretty ingenious. The malware implant on the compromised machine doesn't connect to a typical C2 server IP address. Instead, it periodically checks a specific Google Sheet document or a SharePoint list that the attacks control.
Okay.
The attackers just type commands into cells in the sheet, or list items. The backdoor reads these commands, executes them locally, and then writes the results, output, logs, whatever, back into the same sheet or list for the attackers to retrieve. Symantec listed some commands they saw it checking for, like exit, load, upload, download, and recon stuff, like WAMI, ipconfig, netuse, netstat.
Using legitimate cloud services for C2, that must be incredibly hard to detect with traditional network monitoring, right? It just looks like someone accessing Google Drive or SharePoint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Extremely stealthy. And here's another kicker. Symantec pointed out that GC2 isn't brand new in the espionage world. It's been associated with state-sponsored actors before, specifically mentioning APT41 using it back in 2023.
A tool used by state-backed hackers showing up in a ransomware attack. That adds another layer of complexity. How did they get these tools onto the systems?
For Sateca, Halcyon and Symantec mentioned another open-source tool called Stowaway. This apparently acted as a proxy, and its specific role noted was delivering that Sateca monitoring software payload.
So, a proxy to sneak in the spyware. What other C2 or post-exploitation tools?
They also saw Adaptix C2. Halcyon and Symantec described this as an open-source alternative to powerful commercial frameworks like Cobalt Strike, which are often used by red teams and sophisticated attackers for post-exploitation activities. The Adaptix agent calls back to the attackers, giving them ongoing control.
An open-source Cobalt Strike equivalent, so powerful capabilities for interacting with the compromised network.
Definitely. And to make sure their C2 stayed active, particularly that stealthy GC2 backdoor, they used something called Process Watchdog. Symantec and Halcyon saw multiple versions of this utility. Its job was simple. Constantly check if a specific process was running, like the GC2 backdoor, which they saw using the file name appxmodels.exe, and restart it immediately if it wasn't.
A dedicated babysitter for their backdoor. That shows they were really serious about maintaining persistence.
It really does. It wasn't just about a quick smash and grab anymore. And alongside all this unusual stuff, Halcyon and Symantec confirmed they were still using the more common living-off-the-land tools like PEZEC and SMBExec for moving laterally and executing commands remotely.
Okay, so a mix of the bizarre and the standard. What about getting the stolen data out? Did they use weird tools for that too?
They seem to stick with the theme of using legitimate, less suspicious software, according to Halcyon and Symantec. They use standard tools like 7-zip for archiving, compressing stolen files and directories to make them smaller and easier to transfer.
Makes sense.
And then for the actual exfiltration for uploading the stolen data, they used legitimate file sync and cloud storage tools like Megasync and FreeFileSync.
So, packaging up sensitive data with 7-zip and uploading it using tools people might use to back up their holiday photos.
Pretty much. Again, the goal seems to be blending in, using tools that generate traffic which might look normal or benign to network defenses, rather than using obviously malicious data exfiltration malware.
This toolkit is fascinating. Employee monitoring, Google Sheets C2, open source red team tools, consumer sync apps. Why use such a strange mixed bag? What's the advantage?
The sources suggest several reasons. Halcyon and Symantec agree it helps them evade detection security tools, might not have signatures for this specific weird combo, or might whitelist the legitimate components. It increases their stealth. It definitely complicates the job for defenders trying to figure out what's going on and how to respond. It gives them more options for persistence and deeper data collection. Halcyon put it well. It shows these FOG operators are actively, maybe even creatively, refining their methods, looking beyond the standard ransomware toolkit.
It sounds like they're deliberately trying to be hard to classify. You can't just look for ransomware behavior. You have to look for legitimate tools being misused alongside open source tools. It's messy.
It is. And that blurring of the lines, as the sources point out, between what looks like financially motivated ransomware and what looks like sophisticated espionage tradecraft, that makes defense really, really tricky.
Beyond this really weird toolkit, did the sources mention any other specific technical oddities or strange behaviors linked to FOG?
Yes, quite a few interesting technical tidbits came up. Trend Micro gave a lot of detail on that April 2025 campaign, the one that started with phishing. Remember the payadjustment.zip file?
Yeah, the lure to get people to open it.
Inside that zip was an LNK file, a Windows shortcut disguised as a PDF. Clicking that LNK file, or sometimes a script deobfuscated from the ransom node in that campaign, would kick off a multi-stage PowerShell script called stage1.ps1, This wasn't just dropping one big payload. It was a script that went out and downloaded other scripts and binaries to continue the infection.
More complex, more fileless in the initial stages.
Seems like it. Trend Micro specifically named 2 scripts downloaded by stage1.ps1, lukesubmit.ps1, and trackerjacker.ps1. Their purpose was reconnaissance grabbing system info like IP address, MSC address, CPU details, system identifiers.
Basic fingerprinting of the machine.
Right, and this collected info was then sent off to a remote server. Trend Micro even provided the URL they saw being used. hsxps.hilarious-trifle d91ate.netlify.app. A Netlify address.
Sending recon data out. Anything else weird about that April campaign?
Oh yeah, the ransom note itself in that campaign was something else. Trend Micro mentioned it included a QR code.pns file, which, when scanned, pointed to a Monero wallet for the ransom payment. They even listed the specific wallet address.
Okay, QR code and Monero are pretty standard for ransomware payments now, for privacy.
True, but the text of the note was bizarre. Trend Micro said it contained key names related to the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, yes, DOGE, and made references to some specific member allegedly helping cybercrime.
Wait, DOGE, like the internet meme, and name-dropping people, what was that about?
Trend Micro suggested it might have been the attackers trolling, trying to be funny, or maybe attempting to impersonate someone, or just sow confusion. It was definitely not your standard professional-sounding ransom demand. Very strange, almost amateurish or deliberately provocative.
Trolling in the ransom note? That's
Yeah.
definitely unusual.
And Symantec added another completely off-the-wall element from that same April 2025 ransom note.
Yeah.
It apparently offered victims a decrypt for free option.
Really? What was the catch?
The catch, according to Symantec, was that the victim had to agree to spread the FOG ransomware to another computer.
You're kidding. They wanted victims to infect others to get their own files back.
That's what the source indicates was offered in that note, asking victims to become unwilling accomplices. It's an incredibly unusual and, frankly, quite disturbing tactic. I haven't seen that reported commonly elsewhere.
Wow. That's, unique and creepy. Any other technical details from Trend Micro on that campaign?
They also detailed how FOG achieved privilege escalation in that instance. It used a tool named ktool.exe. This tool exploited a known vulnerability in an old, vulnerable Intel graphics driver, IQVW64.cease, to gain higher system privileges.
Using a known driver flaw to get admin rights, that's more sophisticated than just hoping to find weak passwords.
It shows they have multiple techniques up their sleeve. Trend Micro also noted the malware loader performed sandbox detection checks. It looked at things like the number of processors, amount of RAM, specific MC address prefixes, certain registry keys, even the system uptime tick count to try and figure out if it was running in an analysis environment. If it suspected a sandbox, it would just quit.
Standard anti-analysis, trying to make researchers' lives harder.
Yep. They also found the main payload was embedded inside the loader, encrypted, and only decrypted at runtime using a specific key. And consistent with earlier FOG versions, the loader dropped a log file named dbjohnlog.sys to track encryption progress.
Okay, lots of technical effort in obfuscation and execution. Now, going back to the weird stuff, you mentioned something earlier about persistence after the ransomware hit in that May 2025 financial attack. That doesn't sound right for ransomware.
It's highly unusual, and Symantec really flagged this. Days after the main ransomware payload had done its work in encrypted files, dropped notes the attackers were seen creating a new Windows service designed for persistence.
Days later.
Symantec provided the command they saw used. CC, Security Health Iron Bin Path. CSIL System Daikaikeles VCS, runtimebroker.exe. Start, auto display name. Collect performance information about an application by using command line tools.
Okay, let's break that down. Creates a service named Security Health Iron, makes it run runtimebroker.exe from a system path, sets it to start automatically, and gives it a misleading display name about collecting performance info. Why would they need a persistent service after the encryption?
That's the million-dollar question Symantec raised, their best guess. This service was likely another layer of persistence, perhaps acting as a watchdog to relaunch or maintain communication with one of their C2 tools, like that stealthy GC2 backdoor. mpxmodels.exe. The fact that they were investing effort in maintaining long-term access after the apparent ransomware event is really strange for a purely financially motivated ransomware group. Their main goal should be getting paid for the decryption key.
Which brings us back to the big question about their real motives, right? Connecting the weird toolkit and this post-encryption persistence.
Exactly. This combination, especially the employee monitoring software, Cytica, the cloud-based C2, GC2, and the focus on maintaining access after encryption, all seen in that May 2025 financial incident. It forced Symantec to consider a really interesting possibility. What if the ransomware attack was actually just a decoy?
A decoy? You mean the loud, disruptive ransomware was intended to distract defenders from the real goal?
That's the hypothesis Symantec put forward. Maybe the attacker's primary objective wasn't the ransom payment at all. Maybe it was espionage, using Cyteka to gather intelligence, using GC2 and other persistence mechanisms to maintain long-term, covert access for ongoing spying. The ransomware creates chaos, forces the security team into incident response mode focused on recovery, and maybe they miss the quieter, deeper intrusion that's still active.
So while the victim is dealing with encrypted files and ransom demands, the attackers are still silently siphoning data or maintaining a foothold for future operations.
That's the potential scenario. Symantec also floated the idea it might not be purely one or the other. Maybe it's a hybrid. Conduct espionage and try to make some money with ransomware on the side. Maximize the value of the compromise.
That's a pretty chilling prospect. Ransomware crews acting like spies, or maybe state actors using ransomware for plausible deniability and profit. It definitely complicates things.
It absolutely does. As Halcyon noted, this kind of blurring between traditional cybercrime and the tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, usually associated with advanced persistent threats, APTs, potentially state-linked groups. It means defenders need to be ready for attacks that don't fit neatly into the old boxes. The motives could be much more complex than just getting paid.
Okay, this whole picture, the evolution, the bizarre tools, the potential espionage angle, makes FOG sound incredibly difficult to defend against. So what do the sources actually recommend? How can organizations detect, prevent, or mitigate threats like FOG?
Unsurprisingly, the recommendations focus on robust, layered security. It's less about a single silver bullet against FOG and more about building resilience against sophisticated intrusions in general.
Makes sense. What about detection strategies? How can you spot this kind of activity?
Trend Micro emphasized proactively monitoring indicators of compromise, IOCs. Things like known file hashes for FOG binaries, known IP addresses or domains used for their C2 infrastructure. Symantec and Trend Micro confirmed these IOCs are available from threat intel sources.
So keeping your threat intelligence feeds up to date.
Essential. Sentinel also recommended monitoring network traffic closely. Look for unusual patterns, connections to known malicious IPs, but also maybe anomalous traffic to cloud services like Google Sheets or SharePoint that could indicate GC2 for unexpected AnyDesk usage.
Watching for those subtle footprints, even if they try to blend in.
Exactly. And then there's the more obvious ransomware detection. Trend, Micro, and Sentinel stressed watching for mass file modifications, that sudden appearance of .flock, .fog, .fog, or .foggy extensions everywhere. Also, monitor for the creation of those ransom notes, readme.txt or hellhelpyourfiles.html appearing in folders.
The classic signs that encryption is happening.
Right. But don't just wait for that. Sentinel advised setting up alerts for the precursor activities. Things like detecting the sysadmin delete shadows command running, or critical security services being stopped unexpectedly. Monitoring system logs for suspicious PowerShell activity, or attempts at privilege escalation like using ktool.exe or exploiting known flaws is also key.
Looking for the attacker, disabling defenses, or moving laterally.
Yes. And thinking back to initial access, CrowdStrike suggested monitoring VPN logs for unusual login patterns, maybe logins from weird locations or hosting providers they saw linked to attacks. CrowdStrike also shared that cool technique from one financial client, using decoy files.
Yeah, the honeypot files.
Exactly. Place fake documents that look sensitive in accessible locations. If an attacker touches or tries to exfiltrate them, it triggers a high-priority alert. It's a great way to get early warning during the reconnaissance phase.
Clever, like a tripwire.
And finally, virtually all the sources, Sentinel, Trend Micro, CrowdStrike, Symantec Carbon Black, highlighted the importance of modern security platforms like EDR, endpoint detection and response, and XDR, extended detection and response. They all noted their own products could detect and block FOG. The key thing about these platforms is they don't just rely on known signatures. They analyze behavior. They look for suspicious sequences of actions, even if legitimate tools are involved, which is crucial for catching attacks using unusual TTPs like FOGs.
So behavioral analysis is really critical for these kinds of threats. Okay, detection is one thing, but how about prevention? Stopping them from getting in or succeeding in the first place.
Prevention boils down to getting the fundamentals right, consistently and rigorously. The sources are unanimous on the top priority: backups.
The ultimate safety net.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maintain up-to-date, secure backups of everything critical. Trend Micro, Sentinel, CrowdStrike all hammer this home. And it's not just having backups. You must test your restore process regularly to make sure you can actually recover when needed. CrowdStrike even recommended daily backups to minimize loss. And critically, store them properly, off-site, offline, maybe on immutable storage, completely disconnected, so attackers on your network can't reach them to encrypt or delete them too.
Got it. Backups are job number one. What else?
Network segmentation, mentioned by Trend Micro and Sentinel. Divide your network into isolated zones. If one part gets breached, segmentation can stop the ransomware spreading like wildfire through your entire organization.
Contain the damage.
Exactly. Patching, absolutely vital. Keep everything updated, operating systems, applications, firmware, especially high-risk systems like VPN gateways. Remember that SonicWall vulnerability. Prompt patching closes those doors. Trend Micro, Sentinel, CrowdStrike all stress this. Stay informed about new exploits.
Don't leave known vulnerabilities open.
Right. And the human factor. Don't forget employee training. Trend Micro, Sentinel, CrowdStrike all emphasize this. Regular, effective training on recognizing phishing, suspicious links, social engineering. Build a culture where people feel safe reporting suspicious things immediately.
Because people are often the first point of entry.
Very often.
Basic.
Basic access hygiene, too.
Yeah.
Strong, unique passwords everywhere. And multi-factor authentication, MFA. Sentinel highlighted this. Enable MFA on everything you can, especially remote access like VPNs and critical accounts. It's a huge barrier against credential theft attacks.
Makes stolen passwords much less useful to attackers.
Massively so. Sentinel also recommended regular vulnerability audits, proactively looking for weaknesses yourself, and implementing controls like application allow listing, only letting approved software run, and the principle of least privilege, giving users and systems only the minimum access they need, can severely limit what an attacker can do, even if they get a foothold.
Okay, so it's a real defense-in-depth strategy. Backups, MFA, segmentation, patching, training, vulnerability management, least privilege, plus good detection tools like EDR, XDR. It takes a lot of layers.
It really does, especially against a threat that's shown itself to be as adaptable and unusual as FOG.
Okay, let's try and quickly recap the key takeaways from this deep dive into the sources on FOG ransomware.
All right. FOG emerged May 2024, initially simpler, focused on encryption, targeting specific sectors like education via VPNs. But it evolved fast. Around July 2024, it adopted double extortion, set up a leak site, and broadened its targeting opportunistically across many industries, including high-value financial targets.
And what really makes FOG stand out from the crowd?
It's the combination of sophisticated evasion fileless techniques, disabling security, blending in, and that really unusual eclectic toolkit seen more recently, using things like legitimate employee monitoring software, CTECA, stealthy C2 via Google Sheets, GC2 linked to APTs, open source pentest tools, and consumer file sync apps. That's not standard ransomware behavior.
And that strange toolkit, combined with evidence of maintaining persistence after encryption.
Right. It strongly suggests motivations potentially beyond just the ransom. It raises the possibility of espionage, maybe using ransomware as a decoy or a side hustle. It blurs the lines between cybercrime and more sophisticated threat actors.
So because it's opportunistic and uses these complex, unusual methods, FOG is a threat organizations in pretty much any sector need to be aware of, and defending requires looking beyond just typical ransomware indicator.
That's the clear message from the sources, yeah. Its evolution is a real challenge for defenders.
Wow. This deep dive has definitely shown that FOG ransomware is a lot more complicated and, frankly, stranger than maybe it first appeared. It's not just another encryptor. Its methods are evolving in some really unexpected directions.
It's a potent reminder that adversaries are constantly innovating, using whatever works, even repurposing legitimate tools in malicious ways.
So, thinking about all this, what should you, our listener, take away from this discussion?
Well, maybe consider this. If attackers are now comfortable blending standard ransomware tactics with sophisticated tools once mainly seen with state actors, with legitimate commercial monitoring software, with novel C2 channels hidden in plain sight using everyday cloud services, what other unexpected combinations might they try next? What other legitimate tools or services could be twisted for malicious use? What other layers of misdirection could they employ to achieve their goals, whether that's money or espionage or something else entirely?
That's definitely food for thought, something to keep in mind as you navigate the threat landscape. Stay aware, stay vigilant, and maybe double check those backup restore procedures.
Couldn't agree more. Understanding how threats are evolving, even the really weird parts, is fundamental to building better defenses.
That wraps up this deep dive. We hope this look into FOG ransomware gave you some valuable insights, maybe even raised some important questions.